I am really short, so I may move this a little closer. Okay, that's better. Good sound? All right. So, I am here to talk about people who are wrong on the internet. And I deal with this a lot. This is one of my favorite examples. Apparently, this bedbug mutated so much, it's not actually a bedbug anymore. So it's very easy to find things that are wrong on the internet. And we also have an internet that can deliver to us tons of information at a touch. And so, right, something's wrong, you correct it, problem solved. It totally works that way for you guys, right? Yeah. And that's essentially what's called the deficit model. That someone doesn't understand something, so you give them the information, oh, light bulb goes on, oh, it's fixed. Yeah, it doesn't work. And this is Grumpy Bug that says, nope, doesn't work. And that assumption is very much what a lot of us do. It's our default model because we're totally involved in facts, right? And so I know this information, I'll give you the information, problem solved, yay. No. Because it's, in a lot of ways, what we do online is a little bit like when you encounter someone that does not speak your language, and so you just go more slowly and loudly. It doesn't really change anything. And so what you have to do is realize that the problem is not that their head is empty. The problem is that their head is full of other crap. And you have to deal with all the other crap in their head. This is getting tweeted, isn't it? Damn it. You have to deal with all the other stuff in their head that affects their emotions, their belief, all the encounters that they had before they showed up and you talked to them. So knowing, one of the things that a lot of times what we fail to do as communicators, if we're going to do an experiment, the first thing we do is we go to the literature. There is a literature on science communication, and very often we forget to check that before we start doing stuff. And especially on issues of vaccination, global warming. There is a lot for us to learn in a huge and deep literature that already exists. For example, heuristics, making our brains run on time. So this is a really common error, and it's a great example of a heuristic. It's stripy, it's got wings, it's a bug, it's a bee. Done. That's a heuristic. You see this error over and over and over. We do this because we are super busy. There are a million things demanding our attention all the time, and if we stop to have a really deep cognitive think about how we feel about everything or what everything is, we would never get anything done. And so these shortcuts are the reasons why these mistakes keep happening over and over and over. And once you see the patterns, then you can try really hard to not trigger that shortcut in the way that you respond to misinformation. And so one of the really common ones is the availability heuristic. And part of that is, right, it's things that you know, things that you recognize, things that are familiar become really common. And I mentioned this before, I've spent the last 2 years as a freelancer working in my kitchen in pajamas, so I get really excited when there are this many people around, so that's why I have notes. Because otherwise my brain is just like, wow, there are people here. I have to tell them everything. So we overestimate how many people are killed by bees because it's presented to us all the time. Anytime something bad happens, a spider bites someone, a bee stings someone, it is news. And so because it is so familiar, most people think this is really common. So if you want to change that, you have to make things that you don't want people to remember vague and abstract and complex and uncomfortable. Kind of like our regular scientific literature. That's a problem. The more you repeat something, the more it becomes true, which is also a big problem for us, because everybody has a story about the spider that attacked them in the shower and tried to kill them. So try to avoid repeating misinformation if at all possible. There's also something called the affect heuristic. So this is, we are emotional animals. We will put emotions on everything. And so here is a spider that's in the sink, and you know what the spider is doing in this video. It's like, ah, get me out of the sink. And the person is interpreting that as the spider is angry and wants to kill me. And just telling them, well, actually, spiders probably don't have emotions. That's not going to do any good because the spider wants to kill them. What are you doing? Why are you not helping me? The spider is trying to kill me. And so unless you also incorporate people's emotional reactions and generate an emotional reaction in your information that is positive and friendly and welcoming, you're not going to be able to get people to listen to what you want them to learn. If someone is angry and unhappy, they will not listen to you, period. You can talk at them all day, and it's just not going to matter. And the more complex something is, the more likely someone is to just go, I'm going with my gut on this. And so that's part of why it's so difficult to transmit complex information, because we are constantly bombarded with all this stuff happening to us all the time. We don't have time to make really detailed decisions. But if you are going to write something, make sure that what you write is friendly, upbeat, welcoming, because otherwise people are going to have a negative reaction to it. Then there's also something called the backfire effect, which I experienced many, many times. I wrote an entire post basically about this thing that people keep asking me about, do you really have 250 spiders living in your endocrine system? This is how people read it. When I say you do not have this, they read it as you do have this. So I wrote this post, this isn't true. First comment, hey, can you tell me more about the 250 spiders I have in my endocrine system? Classic backfire effect. And that also gets into repetition. So if I said soup, you say the slogan. Nobody knows this? Okay, nuts. I was thinking soup is good food, right? What if I did Nike? Just do it. Okay, McDonald's. Right. Okay, so a few of these, yeah. And so, again, we're defaulting to something that we have learned through repetition. For some reason, the do nots do not register with people. They just go straight forward. And another great example of backfire effect that I experienced, this is the number 2 search result on Google for fun spider facts. Spiders with hair on them are mammals. So I tweeted this, and I tweeted it as, ha ha ha, spiders with hair on them are mammals, and thus produce unusually cold milk. And the responses I immediately got were, oh my God, spiders are involved in the dairy industry. I had no idea. I learned so much from you, Gwen. And so I had forgotten that not everybody has the knowledge that I have. So having to be extremely explicit about things that you say, and that's a classic example again of when you repeat misinformation, you make it stronger. Repetition makes things stick. None of you set out to memorize any of those corporate slogans, but repetition made it stick in your head. So if you're going to try and combat something, you have to avoid repeating the myth if at all possible, because that just strengthens it. The other thing you can do is, if you have to talk about it, do something called priming. And so what you do is you send up a signal flare that says, I'm about to tell you something that's not true. Here it is. Here's the not true thing. Don't believe it. So that basically primes somebody to know this information that I'm about to get isn't real. I should process it differently. This makes a huge difference when you incorporate it. There's also the problem of when you tell someone something isn't true, you've just made a hole in their head. And our brain does not like gaps. It will immediately try to fill it. And so you want to make sure that if you are going to tell somebody something isn't true, you give them an alternative explanation that fits. One of the problems for us is that, as humans, I talked a lot yesterday about our monkey brains, we want stories. We want narrative. So a false fact that has a story is going to stick. And unless we start trying to incorporate our stories, our facts within stories and with real people, it won't compete as well. I mean, the guy that had the spider that went through his body, we all know it's BS, but it went everywhere because it was a real person attached to it. It had a story. Aggressive spiders that attack instead of running away. There's pictures of the family, and again, this is, of course, it's the Daily Mail. I swear to God, if I could get rid of the Daily Mail, we would get rid of 90% of insect misinformation. But it's a story. It's a story where you have the family is shown going, ah! And so if we don't use the power of narrative, just facts will never be able to compete. People also want reasons. And here we go. Great. So this guy was killed as the result of a spider bite he got last year. This is really not likely. But you know what? For his wife, boy, it makes a whole lot more sense that he was killed because of a spider than something terrible and random happened to my family. And so very often people will try and assign reasons to completely random things that happen. And that's not a place where usually you can reason with people. What you can do, though, and it's also, I would argue, one of the reasons why colony collapse disorder has been so difficult for people to understand, because it is not a simple cause-effect. People want cause-effect, and one of the ways I've described it is it's not that there's a smoking gun, there's 50 smoking guns. And so that's really difficult to convey. And that's where, again, I think we can really learn from the way that climate change is communicated and the lessons that they have learned. Because you have a super complex phenomena that has many different causes, and they're just really beginning to turn the tide on communicating that. We should learn from them. So replacing that gap, if you say that's not true, you need to then immediately do something to fill that space. And it has to be simple. It's, again, this gets back to another thing, I was talking about this yesterday. We have so many things demanding our time. I look out at all of you, and most of you are multitasking right now. You're listening to me, you're on your phone, you're thinking about your talk that is in 10 minutes that you didn't actually write, and why did you stay up last night, and I don't know, and your kid just texted you, and also you would really like some coffee. So all of these things are happening in your head, and if I come in and give you a super complex description of, well, no, this thing that you already believe that is consistent with your existing worldview, yeah, that's wrong. But if I couch it as, here's a story, here's a way to make the connections between all these things, and it's short and it's simple and it doesn't have really technical language, then I'm in a place where I can be competitive. And this is important enough that I actually thought I would torture you with a slide with words on it. If you have to talk about the myth, there's some really great information about this. You emphasize the core fact in the headline. Repetition is critical. So you say, spiders are really fabulous things to have around the home. They're our friends. Sometimes people think that they bite people, but this is a myth. And then re-emphasize, spiders are great, spiders are great, spiders are great, spiders rock, go. So something that basically we have the thing that we want to get them to remember priming, this is wrong, the misinformation, repetition of the correct information, and then an explanation of why the correct information should fit into their worldview. By structuring things like this, the data is so amazing, and it's incredibly effective just using a different structure. Also, images. This is one of my favorite images for explaining cladistics, and it's something that relates really technical language and the way that things are related to something that everybody can get into, which is chocolate and candy bars. So having an image activates different pieces of the brain and supports everything that you're telling people with words. If you're using an image that you are debunking, it is very important that you prime it and you put that wrong on the image. Because what will happen is Google will grab this image. And so if you don't do that, Google displays your image and it becomes repeating the message. So right now, my chart that says this is wrong shows up in the search. So I'm able to actually let people know there's a problem with this chart simply by having labeled my image and letting Google do all the work for me. Also, knowing your audience is really critical. This is like my favorite article ever. So being able to speak to people in language that they understand and in language that is relevant to them. And sometimes we get really, and this gets back to kind of like the deficit model is very much, we are using our language as scientists. I will give you information and you will process it. And that is not how most people work. It just is, you have to think about, first of all, words that have loaded meanings. So you may have seen this if you try to talk about evolution with people. It's just a theory. We use a lot of words in our day-to-day work that don't have the same meanings. And so understanding that we have to use the right language. Another great technique is asking questions to create a conflict. And this is like, I don't know what to do with this. And if you can ask a question and create a conflict in people's minds, that triggers the part of their mind that will process things more deeply. And you will not, I mean, honestly, I'll tell you right now, nothing that I tell you will allow you to have one conversation with someone and change their mind. A lot of that is social norms. This is, some of us grew up in the 70s and we're scarred by it for the rest of our lives. But yeah, I mean, everyone is stupider than one person. Together, social norms reinforce things. And if you've done outreach, you see this. One person reacts to a spider, and then everybody is freaked out. So you have to really, what we are doing is modeling a type of social deviance. And the more people that you can have that say, oh no, this is the way this is, so repetition, also people looking like they're having fun, so we have the emotional pieces, and then just keeping chipping away at it. And my last piece of advice welcome to my world, is to remember that it is not about winning. When we are arguing with someone about facts, we have already won. We know what reality is. The harder you push someone, the less likely you are to succeed in changing their mind. What you want to do is basically leave them breadcrumbs that they can follow later when they're out of that situation. And start the change, but don't expect the change to happen while you are still present. Don't expect change to happen when you are, no, you're totally wrong, you're such a dummy. That's not going to happen. And I wanted to mention the really fabulous debunking handbook, which you can download for free. And there is a whole series of websites that have incredible resources that we can use. That's it. Oh my God, I finished on time. This is awesome.